Hey everyone, Oli here, and this is my review of Doctor Who and the Silurians. The second story of the seventh season of classic Doctor Who, starring John Pertwee as the third Doctor. Doctor Who and the Silurians is the 52nd story overall. It's 7 episodes long and is written by Malcolm Hogg. In addition, this is also the first story to be produced by Barry Letts, who remained the producer for the remainder of the John Pertwee era, and he departs after Robot, and that is Tom Baker's first story. Doctor Who and the Silurians is as follows. Exiled to Earth and now working for UNIT as a scientific advisor, the Doctor is summoned to an underground research center at Renly Moor to investigate a series of inexplicable power losses. Initially suspecting sabotage, he soon discovers that a nearby cave system conceals a colony of an ancient reptilian race called the Silurians. Awakened from a hibernation which has lasted millions of years, they now intent on reclaiming Earth from mankind. So that is the plot for Doctor Who in the Silurians. In my opinion, the Doctor Who and the Silurians is a very good story. It's a great introduction to the Silurians, and it feels different to other stories you've actually seen before. And I get to that bit later. The production of the story was really well done. The sets were great, especially the Silurians cave sets and the Silurian base. And there was some location filming, especially for Wenley Moor. I don't know if it's actually a real place or not, but it was very nice. I liked the whole field and everything that was there, and I also recognized London Marylebone as they filmed there. What would it look like back in the 60s/70s? Is where and that's where the Silurian virus broke out. The direction by Timothy Coombe was very good. I mean, this is his first story that he directs, and he really does some things very well. And I'm glad that he's brought back for The Mind of Evil, and that was actually the final story he directs, because I think he overran the budget, and the BBC weren't happy about that. And he did some things really well. I liked how he was able to capture Dr. Lawrence's breakdown, and how the young Silurian's vulnerability before he decided to work with the other Silurian to take over the Earth. This is also the first story to use the chroma key, which is basically known as the green screen. Yeah, and it was used very well. I think they used that for the dinosaur that was in the caves, in the Silurian caves, and this is definitely an indicator that Doctor Who is starting to become more modernized. I like the serious mood that this story had, and I love the maturity of this story, and it deals with such a serious theme such as mental illness. Because I think one of the guys that went to the Silurians cave went mad, and he was starting to drawing all over the walls, the genocide and epidemics and so forth. It was portrayed really well, and I like the fact that pretty much every single character, apart from the Doctor, Liz, and the Elder Silurian, they were all morally ambiguous, and they each character, I think they wanted the other faction to die. The Doctor, Liz, and the young and the old Silurian were basically, they weren't in the middle. They actually wanted they wanted to have like a third option in which humans and Silurians could like work and live together. And obviously both sides didn't really want that, so that's how the whole madness broke down. And so I like the conflict that was shown in this story between the humans and the Silurians. And I really like the plot of the story because it was interesting to see the least, and I like how mature it was. And it's not like other Doctor Who stories. It's more heavy. It's more one-sided, heavily one-sided against the villain. But in this story, they actually show the two sides and the problems. There's problems on one side and there's problems on the other side, and that's how the story does really well. Even though the plot does actually take its time, but obviously it does work, and obviously, as I mentioned, it's quite mature and it's actually scary as well, especially with the Silurian virus that pretty much broke out in London. I did joke that this story actually predicted the COVID-19 pandemic, which we're currently living in right now, as in the making of this video. And except that England didn't actually have to go into lockdown in this story. I think the Doctor pretty much found a cure for it few episodes late, in this story later, and then everything goes back to normal. And then there were some iconic and tense moments in this story, such as Lawrence's breakdown, as I mentioned before. And I actually like the cliffhanger where the Silurians attacked the Doctor. I think it was episode 6 cliffhanger when they were using the eye to stun the Doctor, and the Doctor was like, I actually found that quite funny, and obviously, Liz getting attacked by the Silurian in the episode 2 cliffhanger, that was a good one. And I actually thought having the story end on a sad note was a brilliant idea because in these situations, there are pretty much no winners, and I like how they were able to highlight that, and I like how the Doctor was upset about that because he was the one that actually wanted the humans and Silurians to like coexist together, and he was really trying hard to do so, even though the Silurians and to some extent the humans weren't exactly a big fan of the idea. The Doctor actually wanted to try and get them to see the good things about it. Even the elder Silurian actually wanted this to happen as well, but unfortunately he was killed by the Silurians, and the Doctor was able to put them under hibernation, and he actually wanted to try and at least have some Silurians be revived one by one to try and talk them into it, and but obviously the Brigadier didn't see it that way, and he pretty much ordered the destruction of the Silurian caves, and that was a very sad scene, and the Doctor was quite saddened himself if they had to turn out this way. And I like how the Doctor held a bit of a grudge against the Brigadier in the following story, even though it was mentioned in passing in that, but you can see there was a bit of tension before the whole action of that story kicked off. On to the acting of this story. I thought John Pertwee, he did a good job here, and I really think that he's actually settling well as the Doctor, and I like the Doctor was able to put his concerns that he's exiled on Earth and decides to like try and help out in the way he can, and because the TARDIS actually doesn't appear in this episode in this story, so he pretty much just goes on Bessie, which actually we see Bessie for the first time, his car, and goes to Wednemore to try and sort out the issue with the power cut and the whole Silurians humans situation. And so he was pretty much the mediator of this story, along with Liz as well. And I liked how he was able to deal with the mini pandemic that the Silurians had unleashed. And I liked his acting, and I actually enjoyed Pertwee's acting when he found out that the Brigadier was pretty much the person behind in the destruction of the Silurians. And I do feel John Pertwee actually found his feet in this story, and finding his feet as the Doctor in this story actually proves that he has. Liz Shaw was pretty good here also. Obviously, she was one of the three characters, as I mentioned before, other than the Doctor and the older Silurian. They weren't the ones that were morally ambiguous. And she's the Doctor. She's with the Doctor, so I think she pretty much took his side, and she understood the dangers as well, and wants to try and have humans and the Silurians coexist. She does get some moments to shine, even though they're fairly minimal, but I say they're still good, but obviously I think Caroline Jordan does a good job here. The Brigadier is great in this story. It's great to see that his character actually does change here, and because his moral compass actually does take a bit of a shift and becomes a bit more morally ambiguous, because he's obviously worried about the Silurians and how he decides to blow them up after the Doctor was able to put them in hibernation, because he thought that the Silurians would probably come back for revenge, and they most likely would have done so. So if they did come out of hibernation, so the Brigadier, I think I would say he did make a good call, and I see his side of the argument, I see the Doctor's side of the argument, but I do think doing it behind the Doctor's back was a bit sneaky, to be honest. And obviously he wanted to protect Earth, so yeah. So Brick does learn from his actions, but it's a good thing he does actually learn from his actions from committing genocide by killing all the Silurians, and even though it's just for this story, it was good to see this side of the Brigadier, and I think Nicholas Courtney did a good job as well. So now on to the side characters. We had the Elder Silurian to start off with. So I think he did actually want the humans and the Silurians to coexist, and he was trying to tell the other Silurians, including the young Silurian, that we should actually try and coexist with the humans, but they didn't see it that way, and because I don't blame the Silurians, because they saw the humans attacking them, so they didn't really trust us. So the Silurians decided to kill the older Silurian, and I like the older Silurian. I think he's definitely one of my favorite side characters of this story, because he's a lot different to the older Silurian, to the younger Silurians, and I liked a the friendship of us. Well, mutual. I say mutual respect, other than friendship, that he had with the Doctor. It was quite good here. Then we had Dr. Charles Lawrence. He was the director of Renly Moore Nuclear Research Facility, and he wasn't really happy at all with UNIT poking their nose in when they were investigating the initial power cuts. And he actually refused to acknowledge the existence of the Silurians and tried very hard to try and get rid of the Doctor and UNIT while they were there. Then he later got the Silurian virus, and he later actually died from it because I think you actually saw like his skin peeling, and that was actually quite scary. And anyway, and Peter Miles, the actor, actually portrayed him very well, and it's a good thing that he was actually brought back in Genesis of the Daleks, where he played Nida, and that's in season 12. Hope I'll be getting to that hopefully soon. And the breakdown scene he had, as I mentioned several times in this review, it was very well acted, and he was just very shouty because he was actually notably calm, and he just suddenly very shouty all of a sudden. It was a tense moment, but it was rather funny at the same time. We also had Edward Masters. He was the undersecretary to the Minister of Science, and then I think he was one of the first people to contract the Silurian virus and then later died. We had Major Norman Baker. He was the head of security of Renly Moore, and he was actually attacked by a dinosaur when he was portholing with the Doctor whilst they were there. He wanted to actually attack the Silurians, but then the Silurians actually captured him, and then the Silurians actually gave him the Silurian virus to go and infect people in London. Obviously, he didn't know about it, and I think he went to Renly Moore Hospital. He had pretty much died outside, and that's when the Doctor and Brigadier realized that things were getting rather serious with this virus. We also had Captain Sam Hawkins. He was basically the unit soldier of the week of this story, and he does assist the Doctor, but he was actually killed by a Silurian at the start of episode 7. He was a decent character, and I think he did get some good screen time. And we obviously have Dr. John Quinn. He's Lawrence's deputy, and he had some form of contact with the Silurians before UNIT arrived. I think he actually captured the young Silurian and actually hid him in the house, but then the young Silurian, I think, escaped and later killed him, and then that's when the Doctor found his body, and I mean, that's how the Doctor meets the Silurians for the first time in Dr. Quinn's house. And I think these were all good side characters, with most of them showing some sort of more ambiguity between them, because we're not really quite sure if they're good or bad, because it's really up to the viewer to decide on who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, because the story actually shows both sides of the argument and does so very well. And I love how they they wanted to show like the terms of what to do with the Silurians and the Silurian caves. They were the human side anyways, and the Silurians, they were pretty much hell-bent on getting rid of the humans so they kind of Earth for themselves, while the humans pretty much wanted to defend the Earth and get rid of the Silurians. And of course, the Silurians wanted to unleash the virus to destroy them, and the Doctor did actually like that, so this was his way of trying to to sort of find the cure and to make sure that both sides coexist. But obviously, this didn't happen because the Brigadier unfortunately killed them all. So we have the villains, and this is the Silurians. As I mentioned before, this is their first appearance, and they do make some future appearances in future Doctor Who stories, such as Warriors of the Deep, which, in my opinion, is a very underrated story. I will get to that when I get to the Fifth Doctor's era. But we do get to see their cousins, the Sea Devils, in 2 seasons' time. The Silurians, they did have a good introduction, and I liked how had some sort of a justifiable reason for wanting Earth, because they initially inhabited it before, but then obviously the humans, they've pretty much made things better when the Silurians were in hibernation, so I think the Doctor wanted to try and find a way for both of them to coexist, but neither faction saw anything, so yeah. And so it did lead to some good tension between the two species, and it was very well portrayed, to say the least. It's a shame they were all killed by the Brigadier at the end, but I do understand why the Brigadier didn't, so Earth can be protected. Plus, I believe some of the Silurians, if not all of them, would have probably gotten their revenge if the hibernation period was over, and it would have been a lot worse, to say the least. I think They do address this issue again in series 5 of Class of the New Who. I think the Silurian two-parter. I think they're a bit similar. These that story and Doctor and the Silurians, and but I actually see both sides of the humans' argument and the Silurians' argument, and I think, as I mentioned before, this is pretty much up to the viewer to decide who's right and who's wrong. And obviously, we have both sides of the argument that are there, and it's good to see that instead of other stories that are just basically rather one-handed against the villain side, and just everything is right in the Doctor's eyes, to say the least. An issue I have with this story is that it's a bit too long. It does take time for it to progress, but it's still good. And another issue I think of this story actually has is the Silurians pretty much look the same. It was pretty hard to differentiate between the two, especially with the older Silurians and all the young Silurians. And I did mention this back in my season 1 review of the Sensorites, because it was very hard to differentiate between the two, between the Sensorites themselves, because they all look the same. Even I think some of them have sashes on, but some of them actually had sashes, and I think they were like the elder Sensorites, and it was pretty hard to try and differentiate between them. But it's something that can be easily looked over. But for it being 7 parts, I mean, obviously some 7 parts have the issues of like really dragging, and I wouldn't say this Doctor and the Silurians actually drags, but it does take its time to get there and is executed quite well. And obviously the stuff I mentioned before, having like how it's very two-sided as opposed to being one-sided, was a good idea. So to conclude, Doctor Who and the Silurians is a very powerful story that deals with mature themes, and it shows that Doctor Who is actually changing for the better. And I gave Doctor Who and the Silurians a 9 out of 10. My next review will be The Ambassadors of Death, so look out for that. Thanks for watching this review. Let me know what you thought of Doctor Who and the Silurians and this review as well. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, and until then, see you guys later.